Good evening, and welcome to Electronic Game Information. We're coming to you live from E3 at the Staples Center in remarkable Los Angeles, California. The convention is now officially underway, and there are a lot of headlines. The Nintendo Direct that was scheduled for this morning was unexpectedly canceled. Nintendo has not announced when it will be rescheduled. Smash fans, hoping to glimpse a look at the new Smash Brothers, were understandably disappointed and left scratching their heads. What Nintendo characters made the cut? How many characters will there be? Is there even a future for the Smash Brothers franchise? Video game stocks got a bigger than expected boost when Sony revealed at their Monday press conference that they would be porting Horizon Zero Dawn retroactively to the PlayStation 2, which is still the best-selling games console of all time. Horizon Zero Dawn director said, "We have these wonderful big game machines these days that can do such amazing things, remarkable, dreamlike things, but I often daydream about a time when we struggled to do almost anything. Everything that we made was a compromised technical nightmare. You go back to something like the original Killzone and think to yourself, wow, people really had to lower the bar for themselves to justify paying for this. And we wanted to be able to say the same thing about Horizon." After this was announced, stockbrokers in New York, London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg brawled over the remaining unsold assets of GameShark. To further celebrate the announcement of Horizon PS2, Killzone Shadowfall was marked down to $4 on the PlayStation Store, giving further evidence to the claim that you can always cut the price of Killzone Shadowfall. Retro Studios retweeted a tweet they made last year about ReCore Definitive Edition. Warren Spector was kicked out of E3 earlier today after being discovered in an air conditioning duct trying to turn off several security cameras. Cliff Bleszinski, who witnessed all of Mr. Spector's careful plans unravel after he was spotted by armed guards, was quoted as saying, "Warren is great. He's a great guy who loves making games that have complicated inventory screens. I don't care why he was in there, but I guess I'm glad they got him out of the air duct." Speaking of the word unravel, Electronic Arts apparently made a game called that at some point, and now it has a sequel that many people are saying is like Little Big Planet, but EA made it? Fascinating stuff. Platformers have made a number of leaps over the years. Tensions reached a critical point when the development team behind No Man's Sky and the team behind Sea of Thieves collided in the E3 cafeteria. For hours, they all paced aimlessly around one another. Small skirmishes flared up, but there weren't any real consequences, and there isn't any sort of resolution in sight. The sequel to the Banjo-Kazooie-inspired platformer Bloodborne will be coming in the not-too-distant future. Project director Hidetaka Miyazaki expressed thanks for the feedback he's received about the ways to improve the game's appeal game's appeal to a wider audience. Earlier today, he said, "Something that really came up a lot were collectibles. People love gathering stuff like puzzle pieces, dinosaur bones, musical notes, and all sorts of fun things that make special sounds when you pick them up but don't have a big impact on the plot of the game. Do you know, I think it reminds them of childhood. This was always something we planned to do with the original Bloodborne, but we're so focused on getting the platforming segments to be as long as possible, we didn't really have the time to add those in. I think people who know how influenced we were by the Banjo-Kazooie games will be really delighted by some of the new elements we've added in. I don't want to spoil too much, but in the sequel you're going to meet a bird who runs pretty fast. Can't wait to meet that bird, Mr. Miyazaki." We turn now to our ongoing profiles of the candidates for the role of Dread Conciliator within the dire council of game developers. Tonight, Kelly Santiago, the co-founder of That Game Company and the creator of such games as Journey and Flower. Santiago is, of course, also a diehard advocate for the game Boom Blocks, which was released for the Wii in 2008. Her passion for Boom Blocks can best be summed up in the following quote: "Did you play the game Boom Blocks? That's the first question I ask someone when I meet them. It's very important for me to know what kind of person I'm dealing with as quickly as I can. The way I see it, there are two types of people. People who played Boom Blocks and people that didn't. I only want to interact with people that played Boom Blocks. That's just me. That's who I am." Santiago is a formidable candidate, a veritable veritech of a contender, and by that I mean she is a Battleoid, a Gerwalker Guardian, and also a VF-1 jet fighter. Good luck to you, Kelly, and I think that I speak for everyone at E3 when I say thank you for your continuing dedication to Boom Blocks. And finally, Bungie announced that they would be canceling the development of Destiny 2 after a full year of beta testing it on the public had not yielded any positive outcome. Bungie co-founder Jason Jones expressed a deep sense of relief. "In the end, we really didn't want to make this game, and I think most players could tell." In other news, Resident Evil 5 continued to make people uncomfortable, and Resident Evil 6 continued to make people unhappy. And those are the headlines for today. And now I'd like to go to the phones and hear what you guys think of E3. E3 is now officially open. The games are on display. The floor is available to the gaming public. What's on your minds on this wonderful, beautiful Tuesday night in downtown Los Angeles? Good evening. You're on Electronic Game Information. It's E3. What are you thinking?
Hey, yeah, I'm just enjoying the show, and I'm wondering if it's going to be all about video games or what.
What? Yeah, so it's an E3 show. Don't you worry at all. This is going to be a 100% about video games E3 show. We're not going to be like those other E3 shows that try to throw in stuff about music and books. This is about video games.
That's cool. I'm a pretty big Nintendo 64 guy myself.
Oh, absolutely. What's your favorite game on the Nintendo 64?
I like NBA Live 2000, which has Tim Duncan on the cover, and I like Mario Party 3 a lot.
Really? That's
yeah.
That's unique. Did you have a interesting childhood?
Yeah, I didn't really get into Nintendo 64 until I was in high school, so
that's wonderful.
A little bit behind.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, let me give you a quick E3 gaming tip for the Nintendo 64. There's a little game called Body Harvest. I think you should pick up Body Harvest for the Nintendo 64. What do you think about that?
Body Harvest, yeah, I'll definitely take your tip on that and pick that up. That sounds like it'd be pretty cool.
All right, happy E3 to you. All right, next caller, please. Good evening, you're on the air on Electronic Game Information. What are you thinking about E3? What's the rumpus? The game floor is open.
I think all the rumpus I'm feeling, I'm feeling Resident Evil 2.
Resident Evil 2, the remake of Resident Evil 2. People are talking about it. People are writing things about it on pieces of paper, and they're letting it blow into the wind. Resident Evil 2, is this your favorite Resident Evil game?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're excited for the remake, the re-release of Resident Evil 2 on all major home consoles, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what do you think of Resident Evil Codename? What do you think of Resident Evil Codename Veronica, pal?
I think it's a goddamn piece of art.
That's right. It's a goddamn piece of art. You know what that game was originally supposed to be? Resident Evil 3.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that?
I remember now.
Oh, good.
I got confused with Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 4.
Well, that's acceptable, I suppose. Next caller. Thank you for your call. Next caller, please. You're on Electronic Game Information. It's E3, and we are having a blast here in LA.
Hello?
Hello. You're on the air with Electronic Game Information. What's the rumpus?
So I want your opinion on Body Dragging Simulator 2018.
Is that what kind of game is that?
You ever heard of Death Stranding?
Oh, absolutely. Death Stranding. It's a game with Norman Reedus in it, right? Hideo Kojima.
Yeah. He drags bodies around.
Oh. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I think bodies are for things like jumping and dancing.
No, I think they're for a lot more than that.
Obviously, they're a lot more than jumping and dancing. But you're talking about dragging bodies around. That's going to take forever. You're gonna pull something. All right. That's all the calls time that we have for calls. We're going to be taking calls throughout the evening, and now we are going to go to our main story. We now turn to our main story, which is a game I made up in middle school. At the beginning of this game, you can choose between Image Comics characters Shadowhawk and Spawn, but you can also play two-player co-op if you have a friend who shares your interests. It's important to note here that Spawn has lost most of his powers, so they are pretty much matched in terms of stats. Spawn is slow and strong and has his axe from Soul Calibur 2, and Shadowhawk is quick and agile and uses his claws. Anyway, this game is a time travel game. An opening story sequence kind of shows Spawn and Shadowhawk running into each other while they're both investigating a series of occult murderers. The Violator shows up then and pushes them into a magic portal. Later it becomes apparent that the Violator isn't actually the one behind the murderers. I might as well tell you it's the Freak. The Freak is working together with Hawk's shadow, but that doesn't really matter until much later in the game. The Violator just pushes them into the portal for now. The two heroes are transported back to a small New England frontier town during the late 1600s era, leading up to the, you guessed it, Salem witch trials. So things are getting hinky. It should also be noticed that that Spawn doesn't have his cape at this time. It's not his big red cape is gone. That's not an issue. So anyway, this is a game I made up. The two heroes in this town in the 1600s. The town is also called Gloomsbrook, and the game is sort of a top-down action RPG, like with big sprites, like Beyond Oasis. It's something like that. The characters are 2D sprites, but the levels themselves are 3D. So actually, it kind of looks like Dark Savior or those remakes of old Dragon Quest games for the DS. So you can kind of rotate the levels and find hidden doors and things. I think that style ages really well. Anyway, Spawn and Shadowhawk have to wander around in colonial New England in the 1600s and try to figure out what's going on. And the basic premise is that the Violator and the Vindicator and several other of Malbosia's lieutenants have been kidnapping villains from the modern Image universe and putting them into portals that send them back to the 1600s. Spawn and Shadowhawk first have to gain the trust of the people of Gloomsbrook, who are obviously very shocked at their appearance. And the first thing that happens in Gloomsbrook is that you meet a weird old man named Zadok. And Zadok says, "I've been waiting for you. I have been having dreams about the arrival of two heroes who will rip the stinking curse out from this dying town. I can't say I like the look of you, but my dreams are never wrong." And then Spawn says, "What the hell is going on, old man? How do we get back to New York? Is this some kind of a trick? There's a murderer on the loose." And then Shadowhawk says, "I don't think we're going back to New York anytime soon." And that's when Zadok says, "Have faith that you'll find the answers you'll need eventually, but I first need you to do something for me. Many years ago, I had a wife, and even back then, she was much younger than me, and I did not want to marry her because she was known to be a wild heart, prone to fits of anger and mischief. Her mother and father were eager to be rid of her. They offered me 3 cows, which during the harder years of settlement was a great temptation, so we were married in the church. Shortly after, we traveled some distance from the town. We needed more land for the cattle, and the king's men were not eager to sell us any nearby plots on account of my wife's reputation among the upper-class landowners. So we took our belongings and our livestock, and we went into the woods. We found a good place for us, with ample grazing and lumber to make our house, and for a while there was some peace. My wife even seemed content for a time, but then there came the dead winter, and we were cut off from the colony. The cows died. We were starving, cold, and fearful. My wife stopped sleeping. She told me that if she did sleep, she would never wake up. She would just stare out at the snow-covered forest and whisper at it. And though I tried to keep watch over her, I was unable to stay awake like she could. One morning, I woke to see the door of our cottage left open, and from the open door, a nearly covered track of footsteps to the line of trees. I searched for her for days. I cannot say that we ever loved each other, but we kept each other safe, and I didn't want to live alone." Spawn says okay, and then Shadowhawk says okay, and then Zadok says, "I failed. When the spring finally came and the snow melted, I assumed I would find her body and give her a proper Christian burial. But even then, there was no sign. I went along with my life, venturing into the village occasionally, and people were kind to me. Her parents even gave me a cow and several sheep to make up for the livestock I had lost. But I resented them because they had wanted her to be gone, and in her absence, they had theirs, and I had no one." And then Spawn says, "I'm sorry for your loss, but I think we should be starting to figure out how to get back to New York." And then Zadok says, "No, please let me finish." It was in the summer that she came back. I woke up in the middle of the night after having terrible dreams, and that is when I heard her singing at the edge of the trees. I rushed to the window, believing that I was still asleep, but there she was in the moonlight. I called to her and beckoned. There was something wrong, something dead and evil in her eyes, a cruelty. She smiled widely, and I could see that her teeth were rotten and green, and she began to laugh and call my name, 'Zadok! Zadok! Come out, man, and meet your wife!' And that's when the wolves started howling. I really can't stress this enough. This is a game that doesn't exist. It's just a game that I made up when I was a teenager. I spent the rest of that night with my sword and gun at the ready, pacing like a prisoner. When I could hear the wolves attacking my animals, I covered my ears and cowered until sunrise. When morning came, I set the homestead to fire. It didn't matter. Nothing would ever grow or thrive there again for years. I lived in the gutters of Gloomsbrook, doing odd work for table scraps. The people here saw me as a harbinger of bad fortune, but were decent enough, I suppose, to not let me simply die in the streets. But when I started to dream of holes in the universe and a house made of bones in the woods, I knew something was wrong. And then I started to hear singing, her singing, and the howls of wolves nearer, closer. Evil is coming. If something isn't done soon, this town. I have no love for the people here, but I am still a man who fears God and doesn't wish that death should come to them. I am too old and too weak, but you can do it. Go into the woods, find the creature who was my wife, and destroy it. And once you do the thing, meet me at the church in Gloomsbrook. And then Spawn says, I guess we'll do that. So that's how your first quest is set up, and like most first quests, it teaches you the basics of combat, exploration, and inventory management. There's also a robust upgrade system, but I'll have to talk about that at a later time. This game doesn't have a name yet. It probably won't ever come out, but in the spirit of E3 and all of the new games being announced, it was a good time to share it. And now I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the game that I've made up. Hello, you're on the air with Electronic Game Information. What do you think of this game that I made up?
Oh, this game you made up. I think this game is absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, what do you like about the game?
Well, it gives me a good vibe of, around the Dreamcast, Sega, Saturn era.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some good stuff like that.
Let me interrupt you for a second there. Were there any characters that you would wish to see in a game like this? Characters that you would like to run into, NPCs, or maybe unlockable playable characters?
Just unlockable characters, just, in general, for anything. Like I can put Croc in the game.
You can put Croc in the game. That's a wonderful idea. Do you mind if I write that down? Croc's in the game. Wow.
Oh yes, please.
Oh, we're going to put Croc in there.
Yeah.
That's I think that's a mascot that really didn't get enough attention. And thank you so much for bringing it up. Croc was if you didn't play it, Croc was a 3D platformer for the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation. It was a platformer that just didn't play by the rules. And you were an alligator, and you just had a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Can we hear someone? So next caller, please. Hi, you're on Electronic Game Information. We're here talking about this game that I made up when I was in middle school. Middle school was a terrifically tough time for me, so I spent a lot of time in my head thinking about things that I wish existed, and I just want to know what you thought about the game.
I thought the game was amazing.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Just beautiful lore. I feel like I'm really excited to see some of the art design.
Oh, wow.
I think that unlockable characters is like a really good idea, mostly just because I want to put Spyro in it.
Who?
But
wait, say
honestly,
it again. Who do you want in the game?
I want some Spyro. Like
Spyro's all right. Spyro can go in there. I don't know if we can have Spyro and Croc in the same game. I think that's a little much. I think that that might be leaning too much on those those kind of platformers that don't play it by the rules. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm
yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. But let me ask you a question. Are there any Image Comics characters that you wish were unlockable characters, or just sort of hidden in the game? Think back to that sort of that high point of Image Comics when you had Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and the great Jim Valentino. They were all making those characters, and we were all just at the trough of Image Comics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mark Silvestri's Cyberforce.
Maybe like Savage Dragon.
Savage Dragon. Now he would be a great character. I'm gonna write that down. Savage Dragon goes in the game. That's a great character. I think there is a Spawn story. Yeah, there is a Spawn storyline where Savage Dragon is in hell, and Spawn has to save him from all of Hell's minions. And that was a wonderful storyline. It really touched a lot of hearts back in the mid '90s. Thank you so much for bringing it up. Can we get the next caller, please? You're on the air with Electronic Game Information. We've just been reminded of a wonderful storyline from, I think it was a sort of run like 50 to 75 of Spawn on Image Comics.
I'm unfamiliar with that line.
Oh, you should check it out. It's wonderful stuff. Spawn loses all of his necroplasm and goes back to hell and has to fight his way back to the real world. It's something else. You should really check it out.
Now, does this have to do with the game that you made up?
No, this doesn't. No, this doesn't. That doesn't really come into it. But I mean, a lot of the characters. So when I said the Violator, the Vindicator, and Malboja, and all those lieutenants, a lot of those extra lieutenants are characters that sort of like popped up in little parts during that whole part. I mean, like, I guess Anti-Spawn would be one of them, but he wasn't really in hell, was he?
No, but will Headless Harn be there?
All right. What's your name? What's your name? You're gone. Okay, that's wonderful. Headless Harn will not be in the game. We will not be talking about Headless Harn or the game anymore because we have our poem for tonight. Tonight's poem is, of course, a poem. It continues our series of poetry that you demanded. This is a poem about the game that I made up. It is. I want you to enjoy it. Please remember that anyone can write poems. You don't have to be a poet. You can be whatever you want. Please enjoy.
이제 긴장을 풀고 눈을 감고 지친 하루가 다 끝났었잖아. 하루 종일 밝게 빛난 해가 다 졌다. 아름답게 빛나는 달이 든다. 잘 자라 잘 자라 우리 아가 푹 쉬고 좋은 꿈도 꾸고 사랑해 사랑해 우리 아가 세상 끝까지 지켜줄게. 잠든 모습이 아주 너무 귀여워. 하나님 정말 감사드립니다. 이 아이를 태어나게 해주셔서요. 좋은 사람이 될 수 있길 바래. 잘 자라 잘 자라 우리 아가 푹 쉬고 좋은 꿈도 꾸고 사랑해 사랑해 우리 아가 세상 끝까지 지켜줄게. 잘 자라 잘 자라 우리 아가 세상 끝까지 지켜줄게.
And now, the list. Tonight's list is, of course, PS2 games that you can't remember the name of. Please remember these are not necessarily PS2 exclusive games. These are just games that you try to describe to people and have to go, what the hell was that name again? Well, one of the names was Hurdy-Gurdy. Hurdy-Gurdy was a kind of a platforming game that didn't follow by the rules. You played like a village boy that was chased by a purple bear. There was Primal. Primal was an action-adventure game where you played as a woman with claws, hooks. She had like long claws for hands, and she just climbed and climbed and climbed. It was a game that absolutely was unforgettable, except many people forgot that it was called Primal. Shadow Man Second Coming. It was a game that didn't play by the rules. It was a game that was a follow-up to the very popular Shadow Man for the Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and Dreamcast, but Second Coming just went past the New Orleans, Louisiana Bayou setting and went all around the world. I think you even fought a sort of variant of the Baba Yaga in Shadow Man Second Coming. Mr. Mosquito was a game where you played as a mosquito and you went around and you sucked the blood out of families. The Unholy War, that's a PS1 game. It's not on the list. Rise of the Kasai was, of course, the sequel to the Mark of Kree, that very classic action game where you sort of spun this sort of white, blurry object around to decide where your character was going to start fighting. It was an unforgettable game, a sequel to an unforgettable game, but the sequel's name was unfortunately hard to remember. Hunter the Reckoning Wayward was a PS2 exclusive chapter in the Hunter the Reckoning series that was otherwise exclusive only to the Xbox. Nano Breaker was a slash 'em up, kill 'em up beat-em-up game that threw out the book and didn't play by the rules. Clock Tower 3 was a game that had a preview in it that used some music by, I think, Franz Liszt, or maybe a classical composer. I want to say Magical Symphony, something like that. Anyway, you saw a girl get her head bashed in with a hammer. Battle Engine Aquila was a game where you took control of a massive battle engine and fought armies of unbelievable size in an unforgettable game that didn't play by the rules. Cold Winter was kind of a spy action game written by Warren Ellis of the Castlevania anime for Netflix fame. Way of the Samurai was, of course, kind of like Bushido Blade, but longer and more boring. Shadow of Memories was an adventure game that I think might have been related to Lunacy somehow. Rygar, the legendary adventure, was a game where you tossed your shield all over the place and had a wonderful time. It was called Rygar. It was a legendary adventure. Project Eden was a game with 4 different characters, each of wonderful abilities. It was played in a first-person perspective, a lot like Omicron, but with 4 players that you could, all your friends could come over if you owned a 4-player adapter. It was a wonderful game. Shadow of Rome was Resident Evil in Rome. Gladius was Shadow of Rome, but without any horror elements, just strategy, and made by the George Lucas Company. Thank you, George Lucas, for bringing us Gladius on the PlayStation 2. Goblin Commander was a real-time strategy free-for-all that was unforgettable. Cold Fear was, of course, a game that was sort of like, if you remember Deep Fear, that was Resident Evil in an underwater base. Cold Fear was Resident Evil on a boat, and it didn't play by the rules. iNinja was a platforming game where you run up and down the sides of walls. Headhunter Redemption. I don't remember Headhunter Redemption, but Draken Ancient's Gate was a floating around on dragons open world game. Graphics were a little primitive, but it was a lot of fun. Ghost Hunter was a hardcore gamer's delight. It was you got to play as a ghost hunter. If you were a fan of Ghostbusters but thought it was too silly, Ghost Hunter was for you. It was a serious take on Ghostbusters. Okage Shadow King was the first PlayStation 2 JRPG that people didn't like. Death by Degrees, that was like a Tekken action game, an action adventure game. Didn't get good reviews. The Getaway and the Getaway Black Monday were open world driving games set in none other than London, England, at a time at a very high crime spike in that city's time. It makes you think of London these days, which is experiencing some similar street violence, but I don't think it really came close to the level of violence that you would have seen in Getaway and Getaway Black Monday. Haven the Call of the King was a game where you played a boy with a goatee. Extermination was sort of like The Thing, except not The Thing game, which you can remember. Extermination is the game that came before The Thing game. Again, The Thing game is the sequel to John Carpenter's The Thing. It was an actual sequel to John Carpenter's The Thing. Chaos Legion was another amazing Devil May Cry style action adventure game that didn't follow by the rules. Tak and the Great Juju Challenge was a child's adventure. Gladiator Sword of Vengeance was sort of the Shadow of Rome, but with a freer camera, maybe. And Sphinx, the Cursed Bunny, and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger were boys having a lot of fun. Champions of Norath was, of course, Baldur's Gate 2, but with a EverQuest setting, and that is the list. What did you guys think of the list tonight? The list. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the list. It's E3, it's Tuesday, we are having a great time. The show floor is open, and we've just gotten through a list of PlayStation 2 games that you can't remember the name of. Hello?
Yeah.
You're on the air with Electronic Game Information. What'd you think of the list?
I thought the list was great, but there's one that I need some help remembering the name of.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so it's a game where you're a giant movie monster, and it's like a fighting game. And you have to
It's called War of the Monsters. It's by the people that made Twisted Metal. Thank you for your call. Is there any other games you can't remember?
Thank you.
War of the Monsters.
That's it for me.
All right. Well, have a wonderful night and happy E3. Make sure to cast your ballot for the Dread Conciliator election. The Dire Council of Game Developers is having their election in a couple of days. Next up, you're on the air. It's Electronic Game Information. We're talking about that list. It was PlayStation 2 games you can't remember the names of.
Hey, Robbie, I was most fond of Mr. Mosquito.
I'm glad that you liked Mr. Mosquito, but honestly, I want to know if there were any games that you can't remember that should have been on the list.
The Thing game.
The what?
The Thing game.
The Thing,
The
John
sequel.
Carpenter's The Thing?
Yes.
Oh, I remembered the name of that. It's not on the list. It doesn't need to be on the list.
It's on the list?
It's not on the list. The Extermination it was on the list. The Thing game is not on the list because it's much easier to remember. Listen, Extermination is one of those games that you're like, it's like The Thing, but I think it came earlier and maybe it was by a Japanese developer. That's what we're talking about. That's the list.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Listen, Captain America, listen, you're having a great time. This is E3. Everyone's having a blast. There's games coming out left and right. Nobody's mad at you. Everyone's just trying to make sure that we understand what the PlayStation 2 games, you can't remember what that list really is. No one's mad. We're all having a wonderful time. I'll see you on the E3 floor, right?
Yes, I have a badge.
All right, thank you for your call. Next up, electronic game information, the list. You're on the air with electronic game information. We're talking about that list. Oh, hello? I'm sad to say we dropped the call. Got to go to the next call. Next call, you're on the air, electronic game information. We've just been talking about the list. We had a bit of a problem there. Someone named a game that they thought should be on the list, but I had to explain to them that it was not on the list. Is there a game that you believe that should have been on the list that wasn't on the list?
Yeah, there was a game. It was actually like a blue cat or something, and it went around eating trash around a town, just jumping around, eating trash from different trash bags in people's backyards and stuff.
Mm-hmm. This was a
really
PlayStation 2 game. This is a PlayStation 2 game?
Yes, I do. I believe so. It could have been. It could have been like a beautiful cat.
I don't know. Are you thinking of? I know what you're thinking of. Vex. Vex was a platform action game where you played a little boy who was also like a bear with spiky hair and sharp claws for hands. It was called Gex, and it didn't play by the rules. Is that what you're talking about?
That's
Gex.
exactly
Vex.
it.
It was
yes,
Vex.
I believe
Excuse
so.
me. All right. Well, we solved that one. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go to the next caller, please. Hello, you're on the electronic game information. We're talking about the list. Any games that you wished had been on the list?
Hi. I really don't know that much about games, so can you maybe suggest something for me instead?
I not really, but I mean, you're on the air, so you might as well just say what you're gonna say.
Oh well, I mean, I kind of keep up with weird indie stuff, so I just wanted to call in and see what you had.
Huh?
I mean, just suggestion from a friend. I'm really lost.
Let me ask you this question. Did you have a PlayStation 2 in your house?
No, I have a PlayStation 4.
Well, that's a remarkable machine. It can do all sorts of things. Go on the internet, go on Twitch. It can play Netflix. You have a PlayStation 4 in your house. You basically don't need anything else.
Yeah, basically.
What's your favorite game on the PlayStation 4?
The single Persona. My friend gave it to me for my birthday.
Well, tell you what. Next time we do a PlayStation 4 list, that's going to be on it. How you like that?
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for your call. Next up, you're on the electronic game information. We're talking about that list. Hello, you're on the electronic game information. You are our last caller for the list.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of the game. It's you're on Mars. There's tons of rules laid out at first. You're alone. It's supposed to be scary. You are encouraged to play by none of them, thus making it pretty intriguing. And you can't ever see your face.
You can't ever see your face? You're on Mars.
Yeah, you're in a really weird space station or something on Mars. There's rules posted all over the walls.
You're talking about Red Faction?
Rules. No, this is like a third-person, like horror exploratory game.
And it's for the PlayStation 2?
I think so.
I think you need to get your facts straight. It's not on the list.
Sorry, man.
That's all right. I mean, it happens to the best of us. Just remember, next time you call in concerning a PlayStation 2 list games you can't remember, think about stuff like Maximo, Ghosts and Glories, and maybe something like Spy Fiction. I don't know. Thank you for your call, though. That was interesting. Tonight I'd like to invite you to join me in a segment about where I talk about things about the games industry that can only be described as interesting. It's a little segment I like to call That's Interesting. If you beat Terminator Dawn of Fate on its highest difficulty setting, you unlocked an option to play through the entire game in first-person mode. Now let's be clear, this was a mode that you could actually enter into during the regular game, but you could only sort of stop and point the gun and aim in this first-person mode. But when you unlocked it on its highest difficulty setting, you could play through the whole game in that first-person mode. And it wasn't a great game. A lot of people really wrote it off, but I think that first-person mode really made it a lot more playable. I think it's interesting that they incorporated it in such a way that it was so hard to find. Do you remember that Alone in the Dark game from 2008? That was a weird game. Yeah, the people that made that game made it so you could skip levels, skip through the entire game. Every single level you could play through out of order if you wanted. That's a decision that they made. They wanted to. They said that they wanted to make it more like a DVD or a collection of TV shows. I think that's a really interesting thing to say. Clive Barker's Jericho. Now that was an interesting game premise that didn't really pan out, did it? What do you think was interesting about the video games up to this point in history? Let me hear what you're thinking. Let's go to these phones. Hi, you're on the air with Electronic Game Information. We're talking about what's interesting in video games.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of interesting things going on. I was interested by the game that was kind of like Ghostbusters. If you thought Ghostbusters were too lame.
Are you talking about Ghost Hunter?
I believe so.
That was on the list. That was the last segment.
Okay.
I mean, it was don't get me wrong, pal. It's an interesting game, and you should really seek it out and play it. It's probably somewhere on the PSN store. Hopefully they've put it on the PSN store, unlike those wonderful Lunar games by Working Designs. But yeah, it's what do you think is interesting about stuff that's not related to the list?
Well, almost anything I can think of that's remotely interesting is on the list. I think you pretty much covered all the things of interest.
Oh wow, that's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me.
That's what I'm here for.
All right, well, thank you so much for your call. Next up, please. You're on the air with Electronic Game Information. We're talking about what's interesting.
Oh, I think that Illbleed for the Sega Dreamcast is really interesting.
That is a really interesting game. You know what game that makes me think of? Blue Stinger. Did you play Blue Stinger?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's not related. I think maybe some small relationship. I think the Climax team worked on both of them, but very similar looking graphics. But Illbleed is one of those games that really just is very, very interesting because you play as, for those of the people that don't know what Illbleed is, you play as a girl who has to run through a series of obstacles that I think her father set up to just scare her to death. Is that correct?
I think it's really interesting, the mechanics with it, that you have to watch with your senses and keep your heart rate down and your adrenaline up.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a wonderful, interesting game. Did you play, last night we were talking about a game called Enemy Zero, which was another game where you had to sort of monitor things with a sort of lack of senses that you get in most third-person or first-person action games.
Oh, wow, that sounds really awesome.
Wow, it's such a wonderful game to talk about. Thank you so much for your call.
All right, thank you.
Have a great night. Happy E3.
You too. Yeah.
Next up, you're on Electronic Game Information. We are talking about what's interesting. Hello? You're on the air? Oh, guess we'll have to go to the next call. Hello, you're on the air. Electronic Game Information. We're talking about what's interesting.
Ooh, interesting. There's this game, and it's real creepy. Something about I have no mouth, but I really love ice cream.
That's a funny joke you just made there. I caught you. I caught you making a joke for I have no mouth, but I must scream. That's an interesting thing. You want to know what I think's interesting?
I did.
You've ever played Panzer Dragoon Orta?
It was a while ago, but yeah, maybe once or twice.
If you remember correctly, you could unlock the original Panzer Dragoon game in that game, but you could unlock the other two. And I think that's interesting that they didn't let you unlock the other two.
That's very interesting.
You know what I think? I think they oughta be paying better attention to Panzer Dragoon fans.
They oughta?
They oughta.
They definitely oughta.
Thank you for your call. Have a wonderful night. Next up, you're on Electronic Game Information. We're talking about what's interesting in the games industry.
Hey, so I was actually having a conversation with my friends about this earlier today. But, so the current incarnation of Donkey Kong is Cranky Kong's grandson, but Cranky Kong was the original Donkey Kong in the Donkey Kong arcade cabinet game. So that means if Mario was fighting the original Donkey Kong, who is Cranky Kong, Mario must be as old or older or maybe a little bit younger than Cranky Kong, but he must be way older than he appears as today.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. But I would counter that I'm pretty sure Mario has used time travel several times in several games.
Well, another theory is that Mario is like Zelda, where like every video game is a different incarnation of his story. What do you think of that?
I think that's an interesting point. Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful E3. Next up, you're on the air with Electronic Game Information. Hello? We're talking about what's interesting. You have anything you think is interesting that you'd like to get off your chest on this beautiful E3 2018 evening?
Yeah, there's actually this one game. Do you remember the E.T. game from a while back?
You're talking about the Atari 2600 game?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, a lot of people find that game interesting. I think it's been a little overcovered, don't you? I mean, they made a movie about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else do you think is interesting?
I always thought it was interesting that a guy managed to find a bunch of those tapes, the game.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I wonder if there are other games that are sort of buried out there in the wilderness. Maybe unsold copies of Blue Stinger or Illbleed.
Yes, that would be very interesting.
Absolutely.
Also, the game Harvester.
What?
The game Harvester.
Oh yeah, of course.
That was an interesting game.
What was so interesting about Harvester?
The animations, the gore, the way that they did live action.
You a fan of the Phantasmagoria series?
Oh yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you for your call. You're on the air with Electronic Game Information. We're talking about all these interesting things. What's interesting to you?
Hello.
Hello. I think we have time for your call, and that's it. So what's interesting, Brent?
You know what I think is interesting? Well, there was this game, Graffiti Kingdom, for the PlayStation 2, where you played as a little boy with a paintbrush.
Absolutely.
And you used that paintbrush to 3D model some characters that you could play as to defeat Satan or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
a good thing to defeat Satan, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Especially in trying times like these.
Yeah.
Hell, you know what? I'm going to make you a promise tonight. I promise that I'm always going to fight Satan.
But you know what, man? You're doing God's work out there.
Absolutely. Thank you for your call. That is a time that we have for calls tonight. That's interesting. And that is our show. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Electronic Game Information. We are going to be coming at you live again tomorrow night, again from E3, where there's still lots of headlines to come, lots of games to explore, and lots of lists to read. Until then, have a wonderful wonderful night.